peace must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
Way back in 1998, the late Secretary General of the United Nations by name Kofi Annan thought of an idea, brought an idea of saying the only way to bring world order where crimes committed that are not punishable in local courts, local countries, regional courts could be taken to an international crimes court. The Rome Statute and Rome Treaty of 1998 July was an offspring of already cooked DSGE intelligence system mechanism to keep Africa under check. Up to date, the French government pays 70% of the salaries of the International Criminal Court, from the porter to the judge, to the prosecutor, and the rest of the other people. This was a project of Kofi Annan and the Kofi Annan Foundation, followed by George Soros as an accomplice of Kofi Annan, brought in by Luis Moreno Campo and the entire system of the West, some countries in the West, to keep check on African countries that did not agree with the policies of the French and to their policies of Western culture. The International Criminal Court Chief Prosecutor Luis Moreno Campo agreed in all this that yes, he has been picking money, extra monies, and we followed the story together with my group in France, powerful investigators in France who worked together with me. And we found out that, truly speaking, Luis Moreno Campo, Fernandez Gomedi, the former judge, the president of the International Criminal Court, laundered money, some coming from American banks themselves. This evidence was put in the ICC. In the case of Bashir versus the chief prosecutor, I filed an application which I still have and which I'm going to publicize again so that people can know that I was right. I've been vindicated because the American friends now have found that my credibility is real, that I was right when I stood up to say this court is corrupt. This court launders money, $17 million of United States money, laundered through Bahamas, through New York banks, back to Ocampo's personal assistant by then, called Fernandez Gomedi Silvia, who later on rose to the ranks of becoming the president of International Criminal Court. It has taken us time, energy, effort, resources to investigate the corruption scandal that have rocked the International Criminal Court. Why should African countries continue to be in the ICC, yet even the superpowers like America are saying no, we have enough courts to try our own people? Viewers, it has taken Americans over 20 years to listen to our voices. When we told Rainberger in Nairobi that this court is a corrupt court.
Today, on the eve of September the 11th, I want to deliver a clear and unambiguous message on behalf of the President of the United States. The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC. We will let the ICC die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the ICC is already dead to us.
A case of the Kenyan people. These cases in Kenya, the chief prosecutor called Fatou Bensouda put serious statements at the end of the cases, discharge and termination. In legal language, these cases pose a very serious threat in the future. What the people of Kenya can do, and they should do, is today to wrap up the work envelope. Because until this envelope is sealed, thrown in Indian Ocean, the chief prosecutor in the future will come and look for that envelope, use it to incriminate people again. It brings me back to the situation. America is sealing its journey out of the ICC. Why do you wait? Why don't you take this opportunity to seal your journeys out of the ICC? America is quitting, warning that it cannot no longer be a party to such an obnoxious court, a court that has no powers, that talks from this side and vomits from the other side, a court that cuts and pastes evidence, a court that buys witnesses, a court that incites incentives, gives incentives to witnesses of a passport and a relocation, then you tell lies about people. A court that sentences you as per the words there. Why should you leave a country that has a jury that checks on what the judges would do, the excesses of judges, and go to a country, a court that has no jury? Time has come for Africa to think. Do we need this court? Does Africa need this court?
We were way ahead of them in our civilization. They set out to destroy us. And Berlin Conference put the nail on that coffin. So they gave Djibouti the same sovereignty as the United States. They gave Burundi the same sovereignty as China. They gave Togo. You see, the EU realizes individual little countries, they can't survive on the world stage. So they come together as the European Union. Now picture this now. So they cut up this Africa into the tiny little countries, small economies that could never survive on their own, but gave them the same sovereignty as the big boys. So that way, when the little bit is thrown into the heavyweight boxing ring every day, how do you put China in the same boxing ring with Eswatini? Eswatini has 1.2 million people. China has 1.4 billion people. And you put them on the same stage and say, go at it, negotiate. Are you with me? Yes. This is insanity of the highest order. How have we allowed this carnage to go on? When Eswatini is thrown in the same boxing ring with China and Eswatini collapses before Eswatini even gets on the stage, the world says, well, Eswatini, what's wrong with you? Why can't you take care of your people? Well, China came in and said, Eswatini, give me all your gold or else. And if Eswatini does not agree, they just go on next door to Lesotho and give Lesotho an extra $1. And if Lesotho doesn't take it, they just jump on to Togo, Central African Republic. It was all by design. 1884. They did something else in addition to chopping us up. They also set out to make the African believe that everything African was bad and undesirable, and everything Western, particularly French and British, was more desirable. We call that the legacy of colonization. Prior to that, they had started long working on the slaves. Make them think everything about them, forget anything about Africa. Where you come from is a horrible place, diseased and dying people, constantly at war with themselves, uncivilized. Cut out any communications with them. You need to just know what we tell you. And we call that the legacy of slavery. So that's where you look at where we are today. 135 years later, a system that was put in place to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated, that Africa is forever exploited, remains in place today, alive and well. And we sit here and we ask ourselves, why isn't Africa moving forward? Why does Africa continue to be taken advantage of? Well, I'll tell you why, very simply. Until Africa comes together as a continent speaking with one voice, one continent, one people, nothing, and I repeat, nothing is gonna change. As individual little African countries, we
several African leaders are on their way to Japan for TICAD conference that takes place or is taking place in Japan this week. This was a conference that was initiated by Japan in 1993 and it continues to rotate between Japan and Africa, which is co-ventured by the United Nations, World Bank, and other international UNDP bodies of the world. But the most important thing that comes out as African leaders jet into Japan is, do we benefit much from these conferences? How many people in Africa do benefit from these conferences? One strand of the reasoning of the School of Thought of Africa, Africa School of Thought, is the conferences are very good area of discussion, of reviewing and fatigue evaluation of what projects have been done and what projects need to be done. But the question remains, do we really tangibly see the fruits coming out to the ordinary citizens of Africa? This last night, I had a tweet with Madame Byanyima, who is the executive director of Oxfam. She sent out a tweet to say, can friends write how many sins, 7 sins that the G7 have committed to bring about the hardships in the world. Believe me or not, in that conference there was a Ramaphosa in Paris, and a Ramaphosa was not recognized until it has made news internationally about Ramaphosa's recognition and being called an identified person. Does Africa learn from these hiccups, mishaps that occur in these conferences? That is one strand. The second strand are countries that are inviting us to go to their places. Are they inviting us because of the rivalry between the superpowers themselves? I've only seen almost all the superpowers have been inviting people for the French conference, American conference, Africa conference, China Africa conference, Russia Africa conference, now Japan Africa conference. To these conferences come in good heart. We have seen conferences being duplicated. Qatar Africa conference, Saudi Arabia Africa conference, UAE Africa conference. These conferences must teach us something. And the something that we must be taught is Africa must begin to hold and host AU, Africa Summit Conference, where the big leaders can come and view and see what can be done on the continent. It will help us, it will make us very valuable, expressing our values, putting forward our values, what Africa stands for. As much as I encourage the discussions, and hopefully African leaders will learn from what experiences that Japan has gone through, from the Second World War, being bombed upside down to a superpower in the world in terms of trade, in terms of economy, in terms of defense security. I believe Africa can do the same. And I believe one day we shall have the Africa Summit calling all the superpowers, including the heads of states of those countries in the world, to come to our African continent. Thank you.
A very good morning to you, and thank you for joining us. This is the 4th of November 2019. Perhaps 8 days to go towards before the unity government is formed in South Sudan, and I have the latest coming from that country. And also, how many days to go? The elections in Kibra that has really thrown this country in octane political temperatures. Right now, the by-elections, they're supposed to be happening on the 7th of November this month, so just a couple of days away. And over the weekend, it was a beehive of activities in that constituency as the different parties went there to drum support for their candidates there. So we will look at that, and majority of that is making headlines today on the Kenyan local newspapers. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Miriam Ogotu, and this is Good Morning Africa, coming to you all the way from the Kenya's capital here in Nairobi, and where we get to look at what's making news headlines, not just here in Kenya, but also the news across Africa, and just A quick look before I get into the newspapers here. We'll have some latest from Algeria and also from Burkina Faso. There, people continue to die under, death that are being caused by the militant group, the jihadist militant group there in Burkina Faso. And also in Benin, some shipping company there was, the employees there were abducted. What is happening there? And also in Mali, also militants in eastern Mali killed 49 soldiers there. And in Malawi, where there has been a problem there over elections that happened last year, but now a court is suspending something that is required for the lawyers and the judges. So keep it here and let you know what is that. And also Botswana, Dr. Mokwetsi Eric Matiti got sworn in for his second term over the weekend. So what's happening and what's the latest there from Botswana? And also former President Ian Khama has denied allegations that he instructed the Reserve Bank of Botswana to open offshore accounts there that were associated with South Africa, a mega business person and mogul there. The family, I think the wife, Motsepe Radebe there. So we will look at that and those allegations the former president of Botswana is refuting. And we'll go to Uganda. And of course, there is an individual that had filed a case at the East African Court of Justice to stop the Ugandan government from implementing a law that would allow President Museveni to contest the presidency again. And let you know what the East African Court of Justice decided, because the ruling already has been made. So I'll let you know the decision from the court there on Uganda's elections and the age limit when it comes to the presidency in Uganda, which I think is already a very defeated argument. You cannot block somebody to vie for a leadership in a country based on their age. I think that term limits will be a solution to a lot of these problems here in Africa, but that's just my opinion. But that is something that we will look at and talk about further in details. And also South Sudan with 8 days to go. And now South Sudan's main civil service groups are proposing a delay of 100 days. What is happening there in South Sudan? We will have this conversation. And in Mozambique, Electoral Commission has admitted that there were irregularities over the October 15th, elections. We talked about this yesterday, partly when we were here with the African Showdown show. If you missed it, then you missed a lot. But hey, I have the update there from Mozambique. And also in Zimbabwe, African Union and SADC have been pushing for the lifting of sanctions in Zimbabwe. But now EU is accusing SADC of exaggerating the impact of the sanctions on Zimbabwe. And also the US really does, instead of even removing some of these sanctions. Remember when Zimbabwe had a national day for protesting against the sanctions that have been meted on the country, and instead the US, instead of paying attention and trying to talk or just hear what Zimbabweans have to say, instead they came out and they sanctioned even one of the ministers there just to show Zimbabwe who's boss here. I think that was just a move that was meant to pour cold water on that protest that the Zimbabwean government had planned for that day. So we will look at that and what SADC and African Union thinks about these sanctions there in Zimbabwe. And also in Cameroon, troops were deployed in Cameroon's capital on Saturday. Supporters of opposition party leader Maurice Kamto defied a ban on protesting, and for the first time since his release from prison, he was not able to make it there, but he was able to organize a protest, but he was not able to go address there as he was being held in his house. So what is happening in Cameroon? We will look at that in just a short bit. But right now, as usual, I'd like for us to go through the news-making headlines here in Kenya, and we do that by looking at the three leading newspapers here, and we will start with someone here is telling me to talk about Biafra. I was reading some information in the morning about the leader, the IPOB leader, Mr. Nnamdi Kanu, and he was narrating how he escaped Nigeria. Remember, the government had a warrant over his arrest, and so he escaped Nigeria through Benin, another country, and found himself in Senegal, and then later on he found himself in Israel after a year, as he was just explaining the journey and how difficult and very extraneous it was for him to have found himself. So he found, of course, a safe heaven in Israel, but that took him a year after he fled from Algeria. So I think that's a very interesting story. You could go online and check it out. And if there's anything else that is happening there in Ambazonia, in the Biafra that I might not have the information about, please feel free to share with me, and I will share with the rest of the world, and we shall talk about it as usual. So thank you so much for those who are joining us and wherever you're watching us, and it's always a pleasure to know where you're watching us from. It's always good to know, because I know our viewers are across the world, and that is indeed a good thing, and we really appreciate your support. Dr. Matsanga will not be with us today, but don't worry, you are in safe hands. We'll still do the business of Africa, and that is talking about our own stories and getting to know what is in Africa, what is happening across the different African states, and what can be our contribution towards bettering the Africa today and what we want for the future. So we all have a responsibility to come together and talk about Africa and advance our own narrative and advance our own solutions to the problems that are plaguing about Africa, including corruption, bad leadership, poor governance. We have to talk about these things. Perhaps by talking, then our leaders might, pay attention, and things might start changing. So we have a responsibility as the citizens of this continent to talk about what's really ailing us, instead of just sitting down and waiting for solutions to come from, outside there. Normally they come with a lot of very heavy price tag for whatever help or whatever things we are brought for from outside there. Normally it does not come, just like that. It comes with a very big, price tag for us Africans that we get to pay, and we see that in the different African countries and how those dynamics are into play. So we have a responsibility to put a spotlight in what is the problem, and what are some of the successes that we're going to celebrate. And talking about successes in Africa over the weekend. Oh my goodness, on Saturday, South Africa, lifted the rugby, trophy there, and they beat England, which refused to wear their, what do you call them? I've forgotten. They refused to wear the medals as they were going to, at the end, because South Africans won. So the second runners-up, that is the second best team, which was England, which they were facing at the finals, you're given all medals, but England, I think they were very losers. They removed their medals, which I thought was just ridiculous. But you know what? Congratulations for South Africa. And this was particularly very interesting and very well-deserved, because for the first time, a black captain that led the team, the South African team, actually led South Africa to victory. This is not the first time South Africa is winning, but it is the first time that they had a black captain that led the team to victory. So it's good for Africa, and we celebrate such wins across the continent. Now they need to fix other problems, including xenophobia. We have not forgotten. So, hey, South Africans, you still have a long way to go. So, thank you so much, Jom Junior. You're saying thanks for standing up all the time for the voiceless. We're proud of you. And indeed, thank you so much. I think, like I've said there, we all have a responsibility to demand for the change that we want in the continent, in the different countries that we find ourselves in. I'm a Kenyan. I think I have a responsibility to demand for good services when I go to a public hospital, when I go to a public office and I'm looking for things, documents or whatever it is. I think for a good infrastructure. So we have to call our leaders' attention and demand for these things and not be complacent. So you have a responsibility. Instead of just sitting and complaining, then, okay, you know what? Sometimes it's good also to offer solutions. This is not working, but how about try this alternative, So that is how we get to move, as a continent. And it might not always be heard or hearkened to, but at least you've said your piece and you've played your part, all right? Good. So now let's look at the three leading newspapers here in Kenya quickly, and then I'll go back to the African news, and then we look at the topics of the day, and we look at, of course, briefly, the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta, the Big Four agenda, something that is quite passionate and very close to his heart. And this is something he wants to be remembered with. with after he's retired. Remember, now he has just over 2 years before his second and final term ends, and the country has been thrown into political, it's been politics since the election, the second time, the 2017 elections that we had. We've not been given a break, and Kenyans are wishing to just catch a break away from politics. So now, and just see and assess how much President Uhuru Kenyatta has done in terms of his delivery and his the big four agendas that he laid coming into second term of office. And is he doing well? How much has he achieved? What are some of the obstacles? What is it that he can do differently? So we'll just look at that much later. But right now, we look at the Star newspaper and the headlines there. I see it reads that why Deputy President Ruto, Raila are desperate for Kibra win, and it continues there to say victory for Ruto will boost his marketability outside his traditional strongholds. And the story is on page 4 and 5 of the Star newspaper, and I think it also makes headlines in on the Daily Nation. But let me just see the perspective of the Star newspaper this morning and So I think it's the desperate to win. Remember, Kibra constituency has been the ODM tough. So DP Ruto, through the candidate there, the Jubilee candidate, what is his name? The former footballer, I'm even forgetting, but I'll just get his name just right now. But, opposition chief Raila Odinga, this is according to the Star newspaper, is facing a reality check in his Kibra backyard where battle lines are drawn for 2022. The by-election is on Thursday. ODM's candidate is Imran Okoth, a brother of the Kibra Member of Parliament, Ken Okoth, who died. He died in late July. And although initially regarded as Raila's political bedrock, he represented it for the more than 2 decades. The unexpected invasion by Deputy President William Ruto into his bedroom has forced the ODM leader out of his comfort zone. Now rattled by Jubilee candidate, ex-footballer Yes McDonald Mariga, a meteoric rise in Kibra and the monumental political significance of the by-election, Raila has launched a fierce fight back to protect his turf. So the by-elections there in Kibra are supposed to be taking place on Thursday. That is the 7th of November. And so we've seen there over the weekend, it was just crazy, and candidates were traversing the large, constituency there of Kibra, trying to garner for votes and drum support for their different candidates. And so that is just in the headlines on the Star newspaper. And I see somewhere up there says former refugee uses education to uplift next generation in South Sudan. Oh, that is quite interesting. Page 12 and 13. Let me see. Like I said there. But if you want to know what's really happening on that page, you go to page 12 and 13 of strong Christian beliefs carried Reverend John Chol through a childhood marred with conflict. After stints in refugee camps, including in Kenya, he went back to his homeland to invest in Christ-centered education. So he's there and he's gone and he's opened school, and he's trying to get more children. And it says that more than 360 school pupils of Good Shepherd Academy in Sherikat, just a short drive outside Juba City, love it when they're in school. So there you go. He's doing a good job for the children there in South Sudan who otherwise might not even be able to access education because of the situation there in South Sudan. And on the front pages here, I see Jocelyn Chepkosgei, Geoffrey Kamworor across the finish line to win their respective categories in the New York Marathon. A New York Marathon happened yesterday, and we see Kenyans also led. Like Kenyans win so much that it's not even like a big deal. But they are on the front pages of the Star newspaper. I think we don't even know how to celebrate, our heroes and people who bring glory to this country. So, but there you are. They did a good job there. And also still on the Star newspapers, maize prices increase to 3,200 Kenya shillings per bag, and maize prices have increased to that amount per 90 kg bag. 2 months ago, the price had dropped to 2,500. So what is really happening there in Kenya? So that is the standard. So we look at the Daily Nation this morning, and it is Battle Royale as Ruto Raila show their force. That is the headline on the Daily Nation newspaper. And it says high stakes as result will have bearing on future duels between DP and Orange boss. That is Raila Odinga. And also it says what? It display of political might in Kibra as by-election turns into national contest, which I don't even understand. But anyway, I see here raising debt ceiling will hurt counties, and Parliamentary Budget Office warns raising debt ceiling to 9 trillion Kenya shillings will reduce allocation to devolve units. So there you go. If you want to know more about that story, go to the Daily Nation newspaper on page 6. And there's also another article here that says how banks cheat on interest caps. Now, commercial banks are exploiting loopholes in the rates cap law to continue charging interest above the stipulated rate, even as they push for it to be repealed. They're using the gaps in the Banking Amendment Act 2016, which enable them to levy higher interest rates. So if you want to completely read the whole of that story, go to page 9 of the daily newspaper, and there you go. So there's not much on the front pages of the daily newspaper. So let's look at the Standard newspaper, which rather has a very interesting, headline here. And I think we must have talked about part of it yesterday during the show, as if we knew this is what was going to be the topic of the day here. But hey, on the Standard newspaper, the main headline is this man messed up a whole economy. That is the former Treasury CS, Mr. Henry Rotich, the A student whose maths didn't add up for 6 years. Henry Rotich never saw a loan he could say no to. The result is a broken people and a distressed economy. That is in page 4 and 5 of the Standard newspaper, and I will come to it. And the governors joined Raila to beat Ruto in Kibra. That is also on page 10. Like, that was what was happening over the weekend with the Kibra by-elections that are slated to take place on the 7th of this month. That is on Thursday. So just a couple of days away. So let's look at how Mr. Rotich, according to the Standard, messed this economy. That is on page 4 and 5 of, and I'll just perhaps read a line or two. I'll not get too much into it because I want us to look at the news-making headlines in Africa this morning, and then we look at other topics of the day. And President Uhuru Kenyatta has appointed Henry Rotich to the planned position of Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Planning. His father was very, very happy and elated. He was confident that his son, an A student of economics who graduated for the University of Nairobi with first-class honors, had what it takes to be the custodian of the trillions of shillings taxpayers put in public coffers. And this is what his father said when Rotich was appointed to this position. He said Henry Rotich was not the type of student who sends letters home requesting extra money for his upkeep. That was in an interview that took place on 2013. But 6 years later, Mr. Rotich has found himself in a situation that challenges any memory of his frugal youth. Along with his former principal secretary, Kamau Thuge, Rotich faces multiple criminal charges, including abuse of office, conspiracy to commit economic crimes, single sourcing for projects, and approving payments contrary to the law. It turns out that, contrary to his father's opinion, Rotich was a poor custodian of public finances, at least according to the Director of Public Prosecutor, DPP. Now, the former CS is among 10 officials in the DPP who the DPP said flouted procurement rules and abused their oath of office by defrauding the state. So this is a story that is on the page 4 and 5 of the Standard newspaper, and I think that I will read a lot of this much later, because a lot of money have been lost under Rotich's watch as the CS of Treasury, and of course he was asked to step aside because now he's still going through an investigation over the loss. Especially what brought him a lot of problems is the Kimoror and Arol dams and money that was really lost through these dams, but also the trillions. Apparently now they're saying he's the person who messed up Kenya's economy. So if you want to know how, go to page 4 and 5 and see how Rotich has messed up why you cannot have more shillings in your pocket and in your bank accounts, or why why you go to the supermarket and you cannot believe how much you have to get with what you used to get with the same amount, because things have really shot to the ceiling. So there you go, page 4 and 5. You can get the details of that story. So right now, I'd like for us to look at, the news-making headlines in Africa, and then later on we will look at the obstacles and the Big Four agenda. President Uhuru Kenyatta's legacy that he's really fighting very hard to make sure that he lives for Kenyans. So Kenyans will remember him with the 10 years he would have been president in this country. So does Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta have a good chance of leaving the best legacy compared to the other presidents, or what is it that is hindering some of perhaps the achievement that he is intending to make by realizing the Big Four? So we will look at that and how practical are they all together, or we will just look at them individually. So right now, I'd like for us to just get straight to the other news-making headlines in Africa, and we took a look at them earlier. So let's just read them through, and we started with Algeria, where Algerian riot police clashed with judges participating in a nationwide strike on Sunday in the northwestern part of city of Oran, local media reported. The judges are pushing for the independence of the judiciary after unprecedented mass reshuffle by the Justice Ministry in October that affected thousands of judges, the AFP news agency is now reporting. Officers in riot gear could be seen facing off against a crowd inside a courtroom in a mobile phone footage shared by privately owned media house there in Algeria. Police were called to the court where the protesting judges had attempted to disrupt a swearing-in session for their pro-government colleagues. And we move to Burkina Faso, where officials in Burkina Faso said on Sunday that 4 people had been killed in an ambush, including the deputy mayor of the northern town of Djibo. The government of the Sahel region said identified armed men ambushed the deputy mayor's vehicle in the commune of Gaskide. It is the latest of a series of attacks in the north of Burkina Faso, where hundreds of people have been killed in a jihadist revolt. We move to Benin, where a Norway-based shipping company says that 9 of its employees have been abducted from one of its vessels while it was moored off the coast of Benin in West Africa. Shipping firm JJ Ugland said that cargo ship the Bonita was attacked on Saturday by pirates 15 kilometers off the coast. The crew's identity and nationality have not been made public, but the shipping firm said the rest of the crew moved the vessel into the port of Cotonou in Benin. And we go to Mali, where militants in eastern Mali have killed 49 soldiers in an attack on a military post in the Indilimane in the Menaka region. The army has said this makes it one of the deadliest assaults of the past decade. The Islamic State group said via its self-styled MAG news outlet it was behind the attack, and Mali has suffered violence since 2012, when Islamist militants took over the north with the help of France. Mali's army has recaptured the territory. However, insecurity there continues and the violence has spread to other countries in the region. And we move to Malawi, where Malawi's constitutional court has suspended its requirement that lawyers and judges wear traditional white wigs and black robes in the courtroom as an early season heat wave sweeps the southern African nation. Temperatures in south parts of the country have hit 45 degrees Celsius this week, the country's Department of Meteorological Services have said. Malawi, a former British protectorate, still follows the British legal system with the wearing of wigs and robes as a requirement for judges and its lawyers. And we go to Botswana, where President Dr. Mokwetsi Eric Kabetsete Masisi was sworn in Botswana as 5th president on Saturday. President Masisi and the ruling Botswana Democratic Party emerged victorious in last week's general election. The ceremony took place in the parliament in the capital Gaborone, and in his acceptance speech, the president pledged to uphold the rule of law and to relentlessly fight corruption. Now, Botswana's main opposition umbrella for democratic change has confirmed that we will challenge challenge the outcome of the last week's election in court. The Botswana Democratic Party that has governed since independence in 1966 won 38 out of 57 constituencies, while the UDC won 15 seats, down from the 17 it got in 2014. I wonder if that had anything to do with Mr. Ian Khama joining the opposition. He defected from the ruling party and joined the opposition earlier, I think in April this year. And still in Botswana, and former President Ian Khama has denied allegations that he instructed the Reserve Bank of Botswana to open offshore accounts now linked to South African businessperson Brigitte Motsepe Radebe under terrorism. In an affidavit deposed in the case of arrested intelligence agent Wilhelmina Mwasabi, investigators said Khama issued the instructions in 2008 when he assumed office. However, the former statesperson lawyer had accused the government of clandestine conspiracy to assassinate his character. Affidavits before the Gaborone High Court said in 2008 that 3 intelligence accounts were created by the Reserve Bank of Botswana with the instruction of Khama and then Director General of Intelligence Isaac Kotsi. We go to Uganda, where a Ugandan who sought the help of the East African Court of Justice to stop the Ugandan government from implementing a law that would allow President Yoweri Museveni to contest the presidency again in 2021 has suffered a blow after the court threw out his objections. ACJ dismissed Male Mabirizi's request to strike out a document supporting the response by Uganda's Attorney General of the court's record, allegedly for being alien to the EAC treaty and the court's rules of procedure, as well as for not being filed and served within the required time. Now, the Ugandan Constitution Amendment Act 2018 saw Clause 102B on presidential age limit removed, allowing President Museveni to run in 2021. In his application, Mr. Mabirizi said the court provided that a respondent shall be given 45 days after being served a notification to reference to file and serve upon the applicant's response. And we go to South Sudan, and just with 8 days remaining, and now South Sudan's main civil society groups are proposing a delay of 100 days in forming a unity government in order to allow parties to iron out their differences and prevent a relapse into war. In a proposal made public on Friday, the South Sudan Civil Society Forum said they were disappointed key issues have not been dealt with ahead of the November 12th deadline, but said rushing into a unity government could be very dangerous. Ahead of the second deadline, Dr. Mashar's Sudan's People's Liberation Movement in opposition and SSOA had said that the unity government should not be formed unless key issues have been addressed. Now, the issues include merge of the armies, vetting and training and deployment of some 3,000 soldiers meant to protect the VIPs, establishing main camps for soldiers, agreeing on number of regional states, as well as drawing boundaries. Much of the delays has been blamed on lack of funds, with President Kiir being accused by other parties of refusing to release the money, while Juba insisted that government should be formed. Reports emerged last week that some of the soldiers in camps under an arrangement known as cantonment were leaving for lack of supplies. And that, I think, puts the country in a very, very precarious situation. And we will talk about South Sudan. And we go to Mozambique, where Mozambique's Electoral Commission has admitted that there were irregularities in the October 15th elections, which saw President Filipe Nyusi win a second 5-year term. The country's largest opposition party, Renamo, filed a suit on last Wednesday, calling for the election results to be annulled due to massive electoral fraud. The opposition submitted an official complaint to the National Electoral Commission for a ruling by the Constitutional Council. Now, Renamo has accused the government of massive electoral fraud and breaching the country's peace deal by using violence and intimidation on voting day. Rather than defend itself against the anomalies, the Electoral Commission said it will leave the judgment on how it conducted the elections and the validity of the results to the country's constitutional court, which is very interesting. And we go to Zimbabwe, where the African Union and the South African Development Community, that is SADC, are pushing for the lifting of sanctions on Zimbabwe to save the country's economy from collapsing. But amid the push, Western countries who imposed the restrictions nearly 20 years ago say Harare should blame itself for not taming graft and guaranteeing civil liberties. Meeting in Dar es Salaam on October 25th, the 16-member bloc representatives from Southern Africa, including Zimbabwe, and chaired by Tanzania's President John Magufuli, called for removal of all sanctions on Zimbabwe to pave way for social-economic transformation. But the EU now is accusing SADC of exaggerating the impact of sanctions, saying they were targeting specific entities. I don't know how, if you're watching this and you are very familiar with the situation in Zimbabwe, please let me know your thoughts on this story. And we end with Cameroon, where troops were deployed in Cameroon's capital on Saturday as supporters of opposition party leader Maurice Kamto defied a ban on protests against the outcome of the 2018 presidential election. Kamto and his backers contend he won the October 7th elections and that his victory was stolen by long-serving President Paul Biya. Kamto was to participate in the protest for the first time since Biya ordered his release from prison, but he reportedly was being held at his house under guard by government police. Hundreds of supporters of Kamto's Cameroon Renaissance Movement Party demanded that the government withdraw its anti-riot police from the house of from the Amado Ahijo Stadium in Yaoundé, so that they could listen to the message that Kamto had for them. Of course, that did not happen because Mr. Kamto was held under house arrest and he could not leave the house there on Saturday in Cameroon. So thank you so much. That is the latest this morning from across Africa. Let me check out. Maybe there's something I've left out, which I know perhaps I have, and maybe there's some information you have here. So let me just go through some of you. Some information here that I see from our viewers across board. And please, if there's something else you think that we should know about Africa that is happening where you are, from the country that you are from, or from any other African country that you think will be important for us to know about, please write in the comment section. I always read your comments. It's important because we always get very informative information from there, and some information that we may not have known previously coming to set. So keep writing to us, and we'll get into that news in a bit. But Ejike Simeon Chuku, okay, I'll just leave that name. There's such a long name, and he's saying to make Africa a better place is just a simple sentence. Does have merging together to be a whole country can separate and go in the separate ways. Then everybody should bring in the idea. People will be raising to know the way forward, like Biafra and Ambazonia in issue of Biafra. They'll never be one. Even the colonial masters know that the people are not okay. I'm really trying hard to understand what you're saying, but I think you're saying that for Africa to move forward, we sort of require for us to come together as one country. I think that is a dream that perhaps even some of our forefathers might have had in mind. That is a dream that the late president of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, had in mind. And we've seen the calls being made lately, that perhaps, having one Africa might give us a more powerful voice. And, one united Africa might give us a powerful voice, especially when we are talking with the rest of the world out there, because we'll come, there's power in numbers, but as it is now, there are different fractions and the different economic blocks and, regional blocks and things like that sometimes, hinder us from having the numbers we have if we are to speak as a continent. And we see that because AU is supposed to make us appear as though we speak as one continent, and AU is supposed to be advancing. When you sit down and you listen to sessions from the European Union and how the countries talk in one accord and agree on things in one accord. You've seen how they've been handling the Brexit matter with the UK, and how EU, all the country member states, they speak in one accord, and whatever the representatives go out there to say, all countries agree to that. But that is, I don't know, maybe because their democracy is way advanced and the way they do things there is just way advanced. But when you come to Africa and you go to the structural African Union, and this is the body that should embody our aspirations, should embody our dreams as a continent, should be advancing our interests as a people. And you see even how our leaders don't even speak in the same voice. And you see the sides they take, even when they go to these international forums out there, you find that Africa is easily swayed, and they would vote against their own African countries when it comes to some of these sports out there. So you realize that we lack unity among our own member states, even the African Union and in Africa as a whole. And so that will make it very difficult. As much as I think it's a very wonderful dream for one day to Africa to be united. I don't know if that would even be possible, owing to the different dynamics in the different countries. And, our leaders are just different gods in their own ways. And I don't think any of them will want to, want to allow power to another no, I don't think so. Due to whatever other factors, and there are countries that have different ideologies, there are countries that are trying to work on their human rights records, and the countries who just don't care about that, and the countries who are working to make sure that they have security and they fight terrorism and they're committed to that. And then you go to other countries who, even how they approach and how they address such matters, differ from the rest of other countries. So we have so much that we still need to work on within the different states, so that that could bring us, by the time we decide now Africa needs to be one huge entity and one huge united continent, then that would have ironed out. But as it is right now, I think it's just, I think it's a far-fetched dream. I'm not saying it's impossible, but let's just be realistic. Look at the East African community, for example, and the member states that are included, and how the dynamics of the relationships between these different countries in the East African state. And then you go to ECOWAS there. Just here on, I think, Friday, I was reading a news about Ghanaians who are closing shops in Ghana there that are owned in the second biggest city there in Kaimosi, and the shops are owned particularly by Nigerians, and the traders there had made sure that they've closed down the shops, and majority of these Nigerians are Biafrans, I believe. And the shops were closed down there in Ghana because, I don't know, the Ghanaians there cannot take up the competition. Initially, it's not the first time they've done that this year. I think it's the third or second time, I'm not sure. But I remember in June, there was a similar incident that happened there in Ghana, where shops that were owned by Nigerians, particularly the Biafrans, were closed down in Ghana. And one of the things that they were raising, the Ghanaian traders there, they were saying, I don't know, the Nigerians, they bring substandard goods, or I don't know, their trade, like other reasons that really don't hold any arguments, because they have their own umbrella of that represents them, the business people over there. And so if they had a problem in the manner in which the Nigerian traders were trading in Nigeria, or were doing businesses in Ghana, then they would have, I think, followed the right channels and went to this umbrella body that represents all the entrepreneurs and all the traders that are from Nigeria and exist in Ghana, and just try to address these matters to make sure that there was fairness, or whatever issues that was, but was handled. But you see the manner in which that was done, that tells you, no, it's not just about these people coming in here perhaps with goods that are cheaper than what they have there, or the competition that is not fair, but tells you they don't want to have these people come in and trade into this country. So when you see that, and I think, is it ECOWAS, sometimes back this year, I think they signed this pact that, they're planning to have one currency in 2020, the ECO. I really don't know the development of that so far. So if you're coming from those countries and you understand, are there new developments from the ECO, the one currency that the ECOWAS member states wanted to have by 2020? Has it materialized yet? Or what are the plans so far? What have they been able able to achieve. When are they launching it? I don't have these details, but this was passed. And when you see the country states already fighting and not allowing the other people to come and trade in their countries fairly, so how will even this echo, even materialize? How this free market? Remember earlier this year we had the free market for Africa, the one huge market, and Nigeria was the Miss Jane come lately. It was very hesitant in signing and ratifying this, but finally it was able to do that. Has it really? Okay, fine. I think it was able to commit to be part of that. But if we want to have this, but still we have all these different misunderstandings between ourselves and the different countries we have, then how are we going to realize a powerful economic bloc in the name of Africa that can trade, that can voice, our concern, and can go out there and present us in the best way possible, and we put people there who actually care and would advance our interests. But if we continue fighting within our different states and not agreeing and closing shops, like in the case of Ghanaians who closed shops that were owned by Nigerians in their country, which I think is uncalled for, or in the case of the xenophobic attacks we saw that were uncalled for in South Africa, where businesses that were owned by other Africans were targeted and were burnt down to the ground. I remember looking at photos of a car showroom. This person was selling cars, and all his life saving, man, he saw it coming down to ashes. Do you know what that would even mean? So if we see such things that are happening, I mean, I don't know, the dream is wonderful. And, sometimes you close your eyes and you think about it and you think, what, this could actually be very good. But hey, and then you wake up to the reality of what is really happening, the corruption that is rampant in the different African countries, and how even it's perpetuated by the government itself in many instances. And now you want to come in together with a country, say like Mauritania or Mauritius, which are leading in terms of democracy and stability and good governance and all things like that. And then you want to bring like a country like, say sometimes Kenya or Nigeria, who are still fighting, or Somalia or South Sudan, who are still struggling with high levels of corruption. You see, it just doesn't balance out. It's very difficult to just balance out the whole equations. I think there's a lot to be done for us to even have that dream of realizing a united Africa. All the African member countries must work on their own, issues before they come out, because I don't think a country would want to inherit, say, insecurity. Like, I do not want to inherit Boko Haram, please, thank you. You see, so Nigeria has to make sure it deals with that. And as I was going through some of this news here, in Mali, 49 soldiers died in an attack on a military post, and this was caused by Boko Haram. And also in Burkina Faso on Sunday, 4 people had been killed in an ambush, and this has to do with Boko Haram. So look at that. This issue of Boko Haram is not only now affecting Nigeria, but is spreading further into other countries. And also in Benin, this shipping company employees were abducted by, some members of the jihadist group. So look at that. So who wants to sit in East Africa and wait for Boko Haram to come? I think we already have Al-Shabaab that we're trying to contain, so we don't want any more, down here. So as I'm saying, and I think a lot of you would agree with me, the different member states still have a lot to work to do. It comes to, just taking care of their own internal issues, so that when we come together the way the European Union has, and you can tell there's stability in the different countries. They speak in one voice. If one country experiences something that, a calamity, you see the support they have. But when you look at Africa here, and take the case of Mozambique, and when it experienced that very deadly cyclone, I think Cyclone Kenneth, and the other one, is it Aldai or something? And not so many African countries were able to come in. A few were able, Tanzania and others were able to come together and say, we'll give this much help to Mozambique. But look at what happened when France, remember when Notre Dame caught fire? there. And you could see the amount of millions that some African countries, were going to donate to repair, to you're like, are you serious? Are you serious? What is wrong with us? So you can see the aloofness some countries feel when it comes to, trying to solve problems and trying to find solutions to Africa today. So I think who brought this matter up? Ejike, now you got me talking about all these things, but I think it's an important point that you've raised. But we still have a lot to do. Different member states still have a lot to do. Regional bodies like SADC, ECOWAS, like East African Community, all the different economic groups, blocks we have across the continent, and we still have so much to do and so much work to do and so much problems and issues to solve. And then after we've done that, then perhaps we can come together in a field where all players will feel is fair, and there will be compromising will be much easier. But as it is now, I think our United Africa is I think it's a facade, sorry to say, but I think it's a good dream. So we keep dreaming, maybe one day it will happen, but that is quite a tall order as things are right now. So in Algeria there were riots over the weekend, yesterday in particular. Some judges are pushing for the independence of the judiciary after an unprecedented mass reshuffle by the Justice Ministry in October that affected thousands of judges. Now, officers in riot gear could be seen facing off with the crowd inside a courtroom. And this crowd, these are judges. So they were going to stop the swearing in of some of the judges, that had been being sworn into office. And so the other judges who had been there earlier who felt the reshuffling was not very fair, and there seems to be some interference by, I don't know, maybe perhaps the army, I'm not sure, because the army is the one who is in charge of Algeria right now, so they went to disrupt the swearing in there on Sunday. Algeria is one country that it's nearly a year since they started the protest. They started the protest in February earlier this year, so they've not stopped yet, and they're not relenting, and they're still insisting we want the changes now, not later, before we even go to the elections. I think the elections are scheduled to happen in December, and they were still protesting. They don't want to participate that, but so far, a couple of candidates have been approved by the Electoral Commission in that country, but Algerians are not happy that some members of the Electoral Commission and others who were taking care of these elections are part of the leadership of now ousted President. He resigned, but he was forced to resign, Abdulaziz Bouteflika, and so they're still protesting there, asking for more things to change in Algeria. Good for them, as long as you don't ban the country, all right? So we go to Burkina Faso. Of course, I've mentioned that, the ambush that happened, and I've also mentioned the killings that happened. 49 soldiers lost their lives in Mali there due to the Islamic State that is affiliated to Boko Haram, that is affiliated to Al-Qaeda, that is affiliated. I was watching another documentary, and they're saying Al-Qaeda has been able to spread its tentacles very much so in Africa, and it's very, very worrying because Boko Haram is just a sister member of Al-Qaeda, and so it's worrying times here in Africa, and we should all be very vigilant and worry about our security. And I'm hoping that the authorities are doing the best they can to make sure they contain this, but not in Nigeria, as it has been seen. Critics have been saying, and it has been, quite out there that President Muhammadu Buhari has been very reluctant when it comes to fighting Boko Haram. So he has been seen as the funder, or he's created a very fertile environment for Boko Haram to rise and for Boko Haram to thrive and really spread its tentacles across other states in Africa, like we've seen there in Mali, in Benin, in Burkina Faso, and the other countries, because he's refused help from other African countries who wanted to come in and help him fight Boko Haram. He's refused help from the United States. He's refused help from any other entity that wanted to come in. So Boko Haram has been having a free day in Nigeria from couple of years ago until now, and it continues to get very strong with no signs of it, losing grip or just going away. So it continues instead to become very strong. And if that does not make President Muhammadu Buhari have sleepless nights, then we have a problem here in Africa. Because now it's not just a Nigerian matter, it is spreading across other African countries, and we have good reasons to worry. So this is something that we shall continue talking about here and wherever you are. These are things that we should bring up so that we see that such things are taken care of. And Dundi, Ume, you're saying there will be no unity because those in leadership are the problem. Because of dictatorship, Nigeria is an example where government is sponsoring terrorism against citizens, bring in foreigners, Fulanis, herdsmen from other Africans working in hands with military protection to kill and take over communities. So those are your sentiments there, Mr. Ndundi Ume. Thank you so much for joining us today. Max Manyika, nice to see you here. You're saying Africa has too many educated fools who can't even agree on the rule of law and what it provides. Yes, indeed. And I call it a constitutional coup. Oh my goodness. If I don't agree with that article in the Constitution, what I'm going to do, I will just call for a referendum, or I'll just change it, and you know what, we will continue, or I'll just blatantly disobey the law. And I don't want to bring Nigeria into this again, but like in the case of the activists, what is his name, Moyole or Soyole, I can't say his name right. Please write his name there for me. But you've seen, even after the High Court of Nigeria said this guy should be released, what happened? He's still being held in jail, and so the government blatantly, refused to even obey the law and the constitution of that country. And I believe nobody should be above the law. We move to Botswana, and of course, President Mokgweetsi Masisi was sworn in over the weekend for his another 5-year term after the elections that happened there that now are being contested. And we've seen that Botswana's main opposition, Umbrella for Democratic Change, confirming that it will go to the court and and challenge the outcome of the presidential results. And of course, the Botswana Democratic Party had governed the country since independence, and it had won 38 out of the 57 constituencies, while the UDC, which is the Umbrella for Democratic Change, that is the opposition party there, was down from 17 it got in 2014. And I was just asking this earlier, could this be because of former president joining the party? Because he left the party that even got him into office, and the independent party there, the country's independence party that is now being led by Mokgweetsi Masisi, and there was a big disagreement there between President Ian Khama and his successor, Mr. Masisi, and the president. There was a fallout, so he decided, you know what, I'll just go to the opposition and back them, and I'll make sure you are defeated. But that has been an egg on his face now, the former president, because the party that he was backing only suffered even to lose more seats than it did in the previous election. And so in 2014, it got 17 seats, but it was down by 2 seats. And so President Masisi, was sworn in for his second term there on Saturday. And in his acceptance speech, the president pledged to uphold the rule of law and to relentlessly fight corruption. On Saturday, I was at home and I was just flipping through the channels in the evening, way past 9 p.m. I was just about to go to bed. And then I went to this movie channel, and when I listened, and there seems to be like a biopic movie that was telling a story about an African leader. So I paid attention the next 3-4 minutes, and who are they talking about? Botswana. And who are they acting, or who was the story based on? Ian Khama's father, he came from a ruling family, and I think they were having a dispute with the uncle, I think from the movie, what I was getting. And Ian Khama's father married, of course, a British woman, and that was, I think, was not very acceptable there during those days. And so This lady refused to leave because she was being asked to leave the country, Botswana. She refused to leave. And the husband was taken to London, and then they refused for him to come back to Botswana. So Ian Khama's mother, according to the movie, had the first daughter, or the firstborn, while the husband was away. And because he was refused to come back to Botswana, he was in London. And so Ian Khama, of course, is the fourth-born of his father. I can't remember his exact name. So it was a very interesting movie. It's called, I think, The United Kingdom. Is it the United Africa or the United Kingdom? Something like that. The United Kingdom or the United Africa. I think the United Kingdom. Go check it out. It's quite a very interesting movie, and it just paints a very interesting picture in Botswana in the 1950s and 60s, just before the country got its independence. So very interesting times there. So it was a very interesting movie. I actually watched it until the end. So there you go. So very interesting. And we look at what other country here. We remember this is Good Morning Africa. So we just read the news earlier. So now I'm just going through some of the news here, making headlines. So we go to Uganda, where a Ugandan who sought the help of the East African Court of Justice to stop the Ugandan government from implementing a law that would allow President Yoweri Museveni to contest the presidency again in 2021 has suffered a blow after the court threw out his objection. So this person, Male Mabirizi, and I think Dr. Masanga talks about this man here. Even yesterday, I think we talked about him here during the African Showdown, of course. But he went to court to challenge why the Constitution was amended in 2018 that removed the clause that, had the presidential age limit removed, and so that allowed President Yoweri Museveni to run for another term. That is next year's election. I think they will be happening in February next year. I'm not sure. But the elections in Uganda are happening next year. So now Mabirizi had gone to the East African Court of Justice to try to challenge this. And why the presidential limit? Because if the law was still in effect there in Uganda, then automatically President Yoweri Museveni would have been barred from contesting another election, because that would have he would not have qualified. That is, if in regards to his age, if the law was still in effect. But of course, it was amended in 2014 and now allows him to go for another term. So now, but here's why I have a problem with this, which I think is a very good thing, and the reason why this man I think he went to the East African Court of Justice after the motion failed in the Ugandan courts, and I think we were watching it some other time earlier this year when the Supreme Court in Uganda actually made a ruling over the same matter, and they said, you know what, we cannot bar anybody from contesting this country's general election or presidential election based on their age. And here's my argument, and I think we've talked about this here before. I don't think barring somebody from contesting on basis of their age is an argument that can really hold anywhere, not just in Africa, but across the world. Look at Bernie Sanders there in the US trying to contest. This is the watch time that is trying to contest the US presidential, post, quite a long time, and he's quite aged, Look at Donald Trump. He's quite he's quite aged. If we were to look at the age term limit, so it's I don't think it holds the age limit. I don't think that is an argument that should be made. What I would have wanted for this person to go there, or for Ugandans to do, is try to see if they can introduce a term limit on the presidential candidates, and how much you can serve as a president of Uganda. Because age limit is, I think, an argument that is defeated from the start. But term limits have helped, especially here in Africa, has helped sort of, bring back and help protect the democracy and the growing democracy and the developing democracy in the different African countries. And although sometimes not really adhered to, And in the matter of these different African countries who have tried to even remove the term limit, we see Burundi that plunged the country into chaos in 2015. We're now seeing President Alpha Conde in Guinea trying to do the same. We saw whereas Egyptians president, their El-Sisi, there went there and changed the term limit. Whereas, like it is happening across Africa. And very interestingly, there is an individual in Tanzania who had gone to court and say, you know what, President Pombe Magufuli has served this country very well, so we want the constitution to amend the constitution to allow him to serve another extra term. And of course, the president came out and said, no, that is something that is not interested in. So the argument of capping the age and saying, this is how old you should be when you're leading a country, I think that is an argument that is just defeated. But can we look at the term limits? Like say in Kenya, we have 5 years. In Nigeria, it's 4 years. You can go for 2 terms. But 2 terms is the maximum. So as much as, Muhammadu Buhari, people don't you feel you don't like him, he's not serving well, but you sort of are comforted knowing that, okay, he only have like the next 3 years and then he'll be gone, So, but when he's there and there are no chances of him ever leaving because there are no term limits that guarantees that, then that is a problem. So it is the term limits that I think we should make sure is protected and is enshrined in our constitution, because this is the loophole, or this is the something that our leaders use to, advance their own agendas and stay in power for forever. So I think that Mabirizi, as much as this was a good move, and I think a very bold move, owing to the situation, political situations there and dynamics in Uganda, I think this was a very bold move by this person. But I think the age limit, I think that is an argument that was defeated from the start. So we look at South Sudan, and 8 days to go. South Sudanese, are you out there? Are you listening? Are you paying attention? Are you nervous? What are your expectations? Do you see this unity government being formed come 12th of November? Just 8 days to go. What's going on through your mind? Do you feel like it is another opportunity that your leaders will actually let you down again, like they have done before? Is it another time that you realize that, these people, at the end of the day, they don't even have my interest at heart. They're just here beginning to, working on and trying to fulfill their own, interest, and just trying to serve their own egos. And instead, they don't have the country and the people at heart. Because from what we can see, what has been happening in South Sudan, and I have mentioned there are 8 days to go, I told you we'll be counting. I'm here, and we are counting every day until the D-Day, that is the 12th of November. And now South Sudan main civil society groups are proposing a delay of 100 days in forming a unity government, in order to allow parties to iron out their differences and prevent a possible relapse to war. And now, in a proposal made public, that is on Friday, the South Sudan Civil Society Forum said they were disappointed the key issues have not been dealt with ahead of November 12th deadline, but said rushing into a unity government could be dangerous. I don't know what will be your opinion on this, because the United States have come out and said, no, we cannot afford another delay. We cannot afford another postponement. South Sudan cannot afford another postponement. And President Salva Kiir cannot afford to form a unity government without the inclusion of all the major key players that are supposed to be part of this unity government. And should South Sudan decide to do this, should President Salva Kiir decide to do this, then that will attract more sanctions in South Sudan. So now, the deadline is on 12th. I think there are very mixed information out there, and I don't know. Mika TJ Benio saying you're watching from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Please tell Jibril Mohammed Buhari to allow Biafrans to go. Okay, thank you for watching. But you know what? I don't know what are your thoughts in South Sudan here, because ahead of the second deadline, Dr. Machar, Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, have said that the unity government should not be formed unless key issues are addressed. Now, the issues include a merge of the armies, vetting and training and deployment of some 3,000 soldiers meant to protect VIPs, in establishing main camps for soldiers, agreeing on numbers of regional states, as well as drawing boundaries. So these are very matters that the side of Riek Machar feels these are issues that should be taken. I think they agreed when they were having that handshake and that coming together. They say these are the major issues that if they could be taken care of, then indeed we can have a unity government. So far, these issues have not been ironed out, and so now Mr. Machar and his camp, and now we see the Sudan's main civil society groups coming out and saying, no, I don't think the country is ready for a unity government to be formed, because should we go there and rush in and form the unity government, this could be very dangerous. I don't know by dangerous what this meant, but I think it's a very lose-lose situation now for South Sudan, because whether it goes ahead and they're saying here, if it rushes, then the government could be, if it rushes into a unity government, this could be dangerous. But also if it fails to have this unity government, we don't know what might happen after that. And if President Salva Kiir decides, you know what, whatever may, I'll just go ahead and form the unity government, now this will just plunge the country into a civil war. And that is the last thing we want to see coming from South Sudan. So it's a very delicate situation there. And, much of the delays have been blamed on lack of funds, with President Salva Kiir being accused by other parties of refusing to release the fund. So far he has released about 1,000 million. Is it 1 million US dollars? And there was supposed to be like 100 million. Is it 10? No, 10 million US dollars that he has released. But he's supposed to have released 100 million US dollars for the peace talks and for the peace process and for realization of the unity government. So while Juba insisted the government should be formed, reports emerged last week that some of the soldiers in camps under an arrangement known as cantonment were leaving for lack of supplies. Now, when soldiers are leaving, soldiers that are supposed to be protecting and that have been forming buffer zones and have been protecting the country and the different places that are being contested, and when you have these soldiers that have been stationed here for a long time, that have gone through very difficult hardships, that have had to sacrifice the comfort of being close to their families, that have laid their lives on the line. They've put literally their lives on the line. And now they're saying we don't even have the basic supplies, and so we're going to leave. They're leaving the camps. If that is not dangerous enough, you tell me what is. I think this already puts South Sudan in a very precarious situation. So I hope that this will be addressed and the soldiers should return to the camps, and whatever they require should be at least supplied. So I know South Sudan is going through very difficult financial times right now, but I think there's more that the leadership of South Sudan can do and should do. Right now, I'd like for us to take a very short break, and when we come back, we'll continue looking at Mozambique and Zimbabwe and also in Cameroon, and then we'll go to our topic of the day, where we will look at the legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Big Four agenda, and what are some of the achievements the Big Four agenda has made, and what should Kenyans look at, and the fruits of the Big Four agenda here in Kenya. Should it come to pass? What are some of the benefits that Kenyans will accrue from this? So please don't go too far. Good morning, Africa. We'll be right back.
Viewers, President Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of the Republic of Kenya, has 37 months left for his term of office to end. We conducted an opinion poll on key tenets of what can be done within the 37 months. We looked at the economy, corruption, judiciary, security, unity of purpose, politics of 22, the referendum, the handshake, reconciliation, the Big Four agenda, dialogue with Somalia, democracy in Kenya, constitutionalism in Kenya, media status in Kenya, what the citizens want, preferred, talked about, international relations of this country, Kenya, and finally we looked at the leadership style of His Excellency the President, what people thought about it, the cabinet, the opinions that came out about the cabinet of the current cabinet of President Uhuru Kenyatta, the opinion about the church in Kenya, what the church is in Kenya, and the opinion about 20 items listed, the debt, the rising debt of the Republic of Kenya, the debt that people have, the debt that the government and the people of Kenya have to pay as a result of the money that they borrowed for infrastructure, reconstruction, manufacturing, the food and the infrastructure. We looked at all these items and we came to a conclusion that in 37 months, there's quite a lot that must change. But there are key factors that stand out within the 37 months of the leadership and the government of President Uhuru Kenyatta. To leave a legacy, the president needs to look at items and narrow down some of the items that can be achievable and those that can be improved and those that can be left for the next government to work on and continue working to stabilize this country called Kenya. The most outstanding items that most people talked about with the highest percentage were judiciary, economy, corruption, unity of purpose, referendum, the handshake, and democracy, plus the church and the debt that was alarming most of the Kenyans. But behind these alarms and behind this scenario, one factor stands out for President Uhuru Kenyatta. He has set the ball rolling in the direction that, yes, a handshake that he took a position to take. It's very rare in Africa for a winner to think of the loser and the loser to think of the winner, and then the winner also to incorporate in some of the activities, not fully in government, but in terms of handshake. President Uhuru Kenyatta stands out within the 37 months left to cement the question that Kenyans want to look at the judiciary, to look at the referendum, at the constitution. Are there some things in the constitution that need to change? If you look at the fight between the governors and the MCAs, between the governors and the central government, devolution has worked very efficiently. Most people did not want even to say much because they needed the services. But the amount of the corruption in the developed units has worried most Kenyans. So can we, in the next, as Kenyans, can Kenyans look at this and find out and take note what they can help the President of Republic of Kenya to improve on, to achieve within the 37 months. I know it is a hard, a long, tall order. It's a tall order that can bring about difficulties, but it has to be achieved. A legacy must be left, especially on the question of unity of purpose, especially on the question of fighting corruption. At least leave a legacy by fighting corruption, unity, creating a united Kenya, bringing about good social standing of the people of Kenya, and above all, cleaning the judiciary, such that it can help Kenyans in resolving the contentious issues. You have done very well on international relations, and international relations need to be encouraged more. But the question of Somalia brings a lot of hiccups. The best way to resolve it lies in your credentials as the President of the Republic of Kenya. The legacy goes on, is in and on track. Thank you, viewers.
Welcome back there. This is Good Morning Africa show, and we are in our last, half hour of the show. And initially, we on the 1.5 hours, there we were looking at, we started with the news making headlines across Kenya, where we got to look at the 3 leading newspapers here in the country, and then we went into African news, and I think there's still some pending, which I will look at in a short bit. But first of all, we just received some information. There's some breaking news that the government has now released the report from the census that was done it was done towards the end of August this year here in Kenya. We had a census that happened in August, and right now, according to the census, Kenyans with the population is 47 million Kenyans with 23,000 men. 23 million men and 24 million women, and the intersex were also counted there, and the populations there is just over 1,000 people there. So that is, the census report: 47 million Kenyans, and with 23 million men and 24 million women there. And so the last time we had these census, I think we were about 45 million Kenyans. And now we are at 47 million. And so that's a lot of people and a lot of responsibility for the government right now of President Uhuru Kenyatta to make sure that service delivery has to be improved, and also things that matters to Kenyans must be looked at because there is an increasement of the population there. So that is just information that we just received when we were on the break. Right now, I just want us to look at the Big Four agenda, and on the clip that was playing there as I had taken a short break there, Dr. Matanga is trying to address some of the matters regarding the Big Four agenda, and there's something that he mentioned that I thought was very important. President Uhuru Kenyatta should have narrowed down just a few things that were practical for him to deliver, because as it is now, affordable housing, we've seen some work being done. Universal healthcare, he rolled out some with a few counties that were to start with this affordable healthcare, to test how this would work. So far, we've not received any information on how the universal healthcare or affordable healthcare have worked so far. So we're waiting for that. But we know earlier this year, President Uhuru Kenyatta and other leaders, we saw it being rolled, I think, in Kisumu, and a few counties were picked, to be as guinea pigs and to try out this universal healthcare. So we're still waiting to hear from the government and know how has this worked, and what are some of the challenges, and what are some of the things that could actually be implemented, and that Kenyans can actually benefit from. So we're waiting for that, because healthcare is a very important matter in this country, and something that President Uhuru Kenyatta did when he came into power is removing the fee. Right now for the mothers in Kenya, going to a public, hospital and having a child is free. So the maternal health care there was taken care of. So it's free to give birth, and of course the visiting the prenatal visits are also free. The postnatal visits are also free. So that has gone a huge way in curbing the deaths that were being experienced there during the birthing time there for mothers and